Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of ShowMeFootball.com and ArrowheadAddict.com, and I wanted to make a video for you guys today because I think there is a player out there that the Kansas City Chiefs could pursue in free agency. A lot of you already know who that is. His name just hit the market yesterday, and that is New York Giants, or now former New York Giants cornerback, James Bradberry. So if you're not familiar with the situation with Bradberry, let me just give you some background. Bradberry signed with the New York Giants as a free agent cornerback a couple years ago on a very expensive deal. And just a couple years in, they weren't feeling it. They didn't feel like he was worth it. And I don't think the relationship between Bradberry and the Giants is great anymore. The Giants had been shopping James Bradberry this offseason, and it was rumored that the Kansas City Chiefs were interested in acquiring him, but only if the Giants would take on some of his contract salary. And the Chiefs would hypothetically send over like a third or a fourth round pick. Obviously, the Giants weren't able to reach a deal with anybody prior or during the draft, so they weren't able to deal Bradberry, at least not for compensation that would have helped him in this latest draft. So they released him. They didn't have any offers out there that they really liked, or nobody was really willing to take on his deal the way it was, so the Giants went ahead and released him. Now that Bradberry is a free agent and he likely won't sign for anywhere near the money that he was playing for with the Giants, the Chiefs could be interested in still bringing him in. There was definitely interest prior to the draft. There was interest prior to him being released. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Kansas City Chiefs were still looking into signing James Bradberry now that he has been released. And they don't have to give up any draft capital to go and get him. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, what is the catch to Bradberry? Because usually when a player is released, only a couple years into a really big deal, it means they weren't playing up to the contract. So, like, is Bradberry any good? I'm sure you guys are wondering. Well, looking at Bradberry's stats, last year for the New York Giants, he had 17 passes defended, 2 fumble recoveries, 37 solo tackles, and 4 interceptions. Now, those are pretty good numbers on the surface, but if you look at his advanced defensive statistics, they have him down for allowing a 61.7% completion percentage and allowing 848 yards in coverage last year. He also allowed a 93 passer rating when targeted, and he had a missed tackle rate of 21.7. So while he was overall pretty productive last year, he also had a lot of lowlights. But what I will say is that the Giants' defense overall wasn't great. Their coach got fired, and that has a lot to do with it, I think. Like, when you're one of the only good players on a bad defense, you're asked to do more than you really should be. It's overwhelming. It's difficult. You have to cover for a lot of other players, and there's a lot of times where Bradberry might not be getting the safety help over the top that he needs, and that is a bad reflection on him, and that's just sometimes how it happens. I do think Bradberry still offers experience. He's a quality cornerback still, in my opinion, watching him. I don't think he was fantastic last year or anything like that, but I think that he still has something to give in this league. He's just not the same player that he was, or the player that the Giants anticipated when they signed him prior to the 2020 season. I did come across an ESPN article, however, from Jordan Rannon, who is an ESPN staff writer, giving us a little bit more insight into the James Bradberry release, why the Giants did it, and how they view Bradberry even now that he is released. The article reads, "The New York Giants released cornerback James Bradberry on Monday to save about $10.1 million against the salary cap this season. New general manager Joe Shen was seeking to trade Bradberry since before free agency in March, but couldn't find anything that worked for all parties involved. Shen acknowledged last week he was surprised there wasn't more interest in the team's number 1 cornerback. "Yeah, I was," he said Wednesday on WFAN Sports Radio. "I thought there would be more interest. There were some teams that showed interest pre-draft, and we had a couple different times there were compensation in place and the contract never worked out. Being the fact that we did have good talks with other teams and their agents had good talks with teams, sometimes if you're going to renegotiate a contract and couldn't come to an agreement, it is what it is." The move for the Giants was more about the money than an indictment on the player. Bradberry, 28, was set to make $13.5 million this season and would have counted as $21.9 million on other teams' salary cap. His release leaves Giants thin at cornerback, where the often injured Adoree Jackson is the only veteran with significant starting experience. So, as you can hear from the article, it's not that necessarily James Bradberry was so bad that the Giants just had to move on no matter what it cost them. This was a move that saved them a lot of money, and Bradberry wasn't in the long-term plans. Even the Giants' general manager was surprised that there weren't more teams interested in Bradberry, likely because he is aging a little bit. He's 28, and he's coming off a season where it was a little bit of a down year for him. So I can understand that, and a lot of teams just didn't want to take on that contract because they feel that he wasn't really worth it. Now that he's a free agent, though, a one-year deal that is worth a little bit of money but not a lot makes more sense for teams, including the Kansas City Chiefs, who Aaron Wilson of Pro Football Network even said on Twitter would still be interested in pursuing James Bradberry. Now, look, I am all for the idea of just hoarding as many good quality cornerbacks as you can get. You can never have enough good cornerbacks on your roster. Build the depth on this team. It seems like a pretty good idea. That said, though, unless Bradberry is willing to sign with the Chiefs for a really fair deal and he's not coming in here expecting to be the number one or even the number two, then I'm all for it. Maybe you could sell him on the idea that, hey, you could come in here for cheap and Spags can use you to your strengths. You're playing in a secondary with other good players around you. You could maybe try to have a bounce back year and then cash in next offseason. If that sounds good to Bradberry, then we can make it happen. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure adding Bradberry makes a ton of sense, especially since the Chiefs traded for Texans cornerback Lonnie Johnson last week. I kind of feel like that move for Lonnie Johnson takes place of the move that would have been the Chiefs bringing in James Bradberry, because if you bring in Bradberry, now that you also have Johnson, that's, a pretty big log jam. And I know I just said a minute ago that you bring in as many good cornerbacks and it plays out how it plays out, however it does. But at the same time, I know the Chiefs were trying to get younger, and they talked about building through the draft. They just drafted 2 other cornerbacks in Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams. Now, those guys are later round picks, sure, but I think they are pretty high on them. And if you are bringing in James Bradberry, like, someone's got to go. But I think the Chiefs like what they have, which is why I said the Lonnie Johnson deal kind of put Bradberry on the back burner. Now, as Aaron Wilson said, and I know he's very in the know, he was the one that was all over Lonnie Johnson to the Chiefs. He says the Chiefs are still interested in Bradberry. I think that's true, but only in a perfect world where everything I said a minute ago is true, and Bradberry is willing to come in here and compete to be in the rotation instead of being promised a starting job or anything like that. Plus, I think there's more desperate teams out there at this point that would pay a little bit more to have Bradberry on their team this year. But I mean, looking at the Chiefs cornerback room right now, you have Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed, Rashad Fenton, Lonnie Johnson, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams. You also have DeAndre Baker, who's still competing for a spot on this team. And somebody's got to get bumped out regardless if you bring in Bradberry. If you bring him in, then, that's a difficult situation. And you have these guys that you might value for the future more than Bradberry that might not make it onto the practice squad or something like that if you were to cut them and keep Bradberry. And I don't think Bradberry is so good that he's worth doing all that maneuvering. I still think Bradberry is a good quality cornerback to have on your roster, and he's good in zone coverage, but I don't think he's, like I said, so good that you have to do all this maneuvering around and crunching of the numbers to bring him in. I think the Chiefs are going to roll with what they got, and I think they really like what they have in Lonnie Johnson. I think Lonnie Johnson was a home run deal for them. I think they like him more than they do Bradberry. He's got way more upside than Bradberry. I'm excited for Lonnie Johnson, guys. I think people are underrating what the Chiefs have in him. So we'll see what happens. Could the Chiefs bring in Bradberry? Maybe. We'll just have to see, but I want to hear from you guys. Do you think the Kansas City Chiefs should still pursue cornerback James Bradberry? Let me know in the comments, but all that being said, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this, and make sure you check out my work on ShowMeFootball.com and ArrowheadAddict.com. I will see you all in the next one.